Hello, folks. I'm Katie.
I'm Vinny, and this is Learn Real Good.
That's right, a podcast about learning.
About science and having a good time and chatting and meeting people. Learning science facts.
People meeting people. That's what the show's about.
Yeah. People meeting people, talking science.
Yes.
That's the alternate name for this podcast.
Yeah. We thought about many different names, like two goofballs talking about science.
Yeah. Science on my mind.
World keeps turning and we keep learning.
That's a good one.
Thank you.
It's a bit of a mouthful.
It's too long.
It is a bit long.
It's hard to write a concise title. That's skill.
Learn Real Good. Nailed it.
Yeah. And it's just grammatically incorrect enough to signify that we're not too serious.
Yeah, we're not taking this too seriously.
No.
No.
There's enough serious podcasts.
Yeah, especially science ones.
Yeah,
Not enough.
Loosen up.
Yeah.
Am I right?
Let your hair down.
So what have you been up to, Vinny?
What have I been up to? I've been mostly kind of just doing house repairs.
Ooh.
Yeah, tidying up, cleaning up stuff from outside that has been neglected too long.
And that has a lot to do with the fact that you chose to build your house out of straw, right?
Yeah,
That's brought on a lot of wolf issues.
We've had a lot of wolf problems, blowing mostly. But thankfully I have some hair on my chinny chin chin, so that's been a real saving grace.
I guess it's been a while since I heard that nursery rhyme. I don't remember the hair on the chinny chin chin having a causal role in that story.
Yeah. Go back and then read it.
I guess I have to go back.
I read that once a year, and I always learn something new.
I'm wondering why you open up that big book of nursery rhymes around Christmas.
I sit down and as much as I read it, it reads me. Well, what have you been up to?
What have I been up to? Watching you do repairs.
Yeah.
And not helping, just observing.
Watching, yeah.
Well, a good scientist observes.
That's right. You've got your notebook out. You've been taking notes. Are you going to publish?
Yes, I'm going to publish a paper. You won't, unfortunately, be one of the co-authors.
No,
I know it feels wrong.
We can't put the subject as a co-author.
Exactly. See, you get it.
I get it.
So sole authored paper.
Oh, that's pretty good. What was your hypothesis, by the way?
That the house would blow over when the wolf blew on it twice.
Conclusion?
Success. Point wolf.
That's true.
Vinny.
I shouldn't have made it out of straw.
We talked about it.
I do have plans to upgrade the house to sticks.
Well, now, I don't know if that's big enough of a difference. It's really
Well, I feel like it is.
Okay.
Like, straw, you know what? In retrospect, poor choice of building material.
I'd give a critique right now, but I feel another paper coming, so I'm going to let you see this through.
Okay. I think sticks is really going to do it.
All right. I'm going to encourage you. I'm going to yes and you here and be a supportive partner.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem. You got a fact for me?
I do have a fact for you. Would you like it?
I would love to hear a fact.
So recently, astronomers detected something very unusual.
Uh-oh, UFO.
No, not UFOs. Well, not obviously UFOs.
Were they identified?
Well, it wasn't an object. It's radio waves.
Ooh.
And they're coming from the center of our galaxy. And now it could be coming from the center of the galaxy, or it could be on the other side of the galaxy. It just happens to be in the direction of the center of the galaxy. So if we're on the opposite end of a record player and something happens to be coming through the center,
I see.
It doesn't necessarily mean, because on radio signals we can't get distances, so we have no idea how far away it is.
How do we know it went through the center?
Well, you just point your radio telescope at the center of the galaxy, and that's where you spot it.
I gotcha. Okay, I'm getting this.
And so there was this bright radio signal that was going on for weeks, and then it suddenly stopped.
Ooh.
And then they're like, oh, where'd it go? And so they put up some more instruments on it, and then it was gone, and then it showed up again. And then it went away again after a day. So it had been on for weeks, then came on again for a day, then went off again, and has been intermittently turning on and off.
This is like the story in Contact, isn't it? You're basically...
Yeah, well, next up is Contacting Jodie Foster and Matthew McConaughey.
I love that movie so
That's
much.
a great movie. Yeah.
Okay, so go on.
And so they've like ruled out things that it could, like a star eating another star, or pulsars that are very regular because they pulse in a very regular way. So there are a bunch of things in the known, galaxy and universe at large that do put off radio waves like this. but not with this pattern where it's like on for a while and off for a while. And a few years ago, they detected something similar to this, where it was turning on and off really rapid for like 10-minute bursts every 77 minutes for a period of like several days. And then it stopped emitting. And they gave it a fun name. They called it the Great Galactic Burper.
Stop it.
Nope, that's the technical name for it. And so this new one doesn't have a name, but I'm hoping it's like...
Ooh, let's do it. Let's get the name
What do you think
here.
It should be?
The Modest Galactic Farter.
That's it, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
What else makes irregular?
Yeah. Or like a belcher. Like to keep it in the same family.
Well, how is that different, burping and belching? I feel like belching is bigger. So if this is smaller...
Well, we don't know if it's smaller or not yet. So yeah, there's this wild signal that's coming out, in theory, supposedly, and the most likely suspect is something in the center of our galaxy is just randomly putting out these powerful radio waves.
So we don't know what could be doing this?
We have no known physical phenomena to explain this pattern.
Any guesses what it could be? Like a new type of star?
Just
I don't know.
A baby with a flashlight, maybe?
Oh, come on now.
No, I don't know.
Oh,
it could be anything. It could be stars falling into a black hole. Who knows?
In our galaxy?
Oh, yeah. Well, the center of the galaxy, the current leading theory is that there's like a supermassive black hole that's really... Everything is spinning into it like a toilet being flushed.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Okay. Are we going to get sucked into that?
I mean...
I'm looking to you for answers.
I don't think so. I think we'll be all right.
Is that why the Milky Way is sort of like spirally? Does that have anything to do with it?
I don't know if we could, because we're on the edge of the spiral. So it'd be like looking through, if you were on a record and you were looking down the length of it, you wouldn't really see the pattern of the spiral. The only reason we know it's a spiral is because we measure the density of the stars and plot it against distance. And you can see it going up sharply and then down sharply and then up sharply and down sharply. And that is consistent with other spiral galaxies that we've seen. So it looks like the arms of a spiral. So we assume that we are in a spiral galaxy as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
Astronomy's way over my head.
It's pretty fun.
It's very cool. Okay, cool. Well, I hope you figure out what that is.
I'm on the case.
It reminds me, your joke about a baby with a flashlight reminds me of, and this is not my science fact, but I read a really funny tweet by a scientist who talked about dealing with, for months, they had like spurious DNA in their lizard sample, and they're trying to figure out like what is happening. Like I had this pure sample, what is this lizard's DNA that keeps getting into my DNA sample? And it turned out there was a gecko living in their office
that they had no idea
had been getting in and out of the samples.
And these were other lizards' DNA that they were looking at, and then they found like weird lizard DNA. And they're like, what is this? Yes. And it was a gecko.
Yes, there was a gecko in the office,
just spitting on things.
I don't know, or just being in the environment, like cells float in. I'm not sure how. It was just a tweet, but I thought that was hilarious.
That's pretty funny.
They spent months dealing with this.
Well, I mean, there's a famous experiment that was looking at like had this very sensitive instrument, and every so often it was detecting this like on and off signal, and it turned out to be the cafeteria's microwave.
Oh, I think you've told me that.
Yeah,
that is
that
a
happens,
great anecdote.
Right? Microwave. What's your science fact, Katie?
Okay, so, and this is not my field of expertise, so I'm going to attempt to do this
almost
justice. Better. So this is fun because it's a cool finding and we don't know its significance yet. But it's just sort of like, wouldn't have thought that was connected. So first off, Vinny, are you familiar with the term sharp wave ripples?
No.
Okay.
Sounds like a great ice cream flavor.
Not too sharp. I love a sharp wave ripples.
It's got razor blades in it.
With mint.
Oh, sharp wave ripples.
Yes. So it refers to these like patterns in the brain of our neurons communicating. And it makes these very strong electrical signals that are easy to pick up to know when they happen. And they come out of the hippocampus, which is part of the brain that has a strong links to memory.
It's the part of the university where the hippos go.
Yes, the hippocampus. And we know so far that these sharp wave ripples tend to be emitted when you learn something new or when you commit short-term memories to long-term memory. And also when you're in deep sleep, these things sort of light up.
I really appreciate that your hand gesture for deep sleep is the twinkling of your fingers.
Well, that's the neurons.
Oh, it's the neurons going while you're
Neurons,
dreaming.
not deep sleep.
I like
Correct.
it.
That's my sharp wave ripple ice cream symbol. Okay, so what is this discovery? So this comes from a study recently published in Nature where scientists were looking at brain activity in rats. And what they wanted to see is what else is going on physiologically with these ripples. They didn't really have a hypothesis. They're just like, okay, we know these ripples happen during these times. Is there anything else that is sort of correlated with that happens at the same time? And what they found was that blood glucose levels are closely tied to this.
Wow.
So when you eat food and your body breaks it down into single little bits, right, your blood sugar goes up.
Yes.
And when your blood sugar goes up, if it goes too high, because you have like a happy Goldilocks level of blood sugar, if it's too high, your body releases
insulin.
Yeah, right? And that tells your body, too much sugar in the blood, suck it up, muscles and liver. And then there's another hormone that does the opposite. If you don't have enough in your blood, it says, hey, liver, break up that big sugar into little sugars, stick it in the blood. So you have the happy levels.
Good work, everybody.
So when these sharp wave ripples happen, your blood sugar goes way down.
Oh.
Which is surprising why this would be connected. And if you were to guess the way they would be connected, you'd think it'd go the other way. Because when your brain's really active, that requires a lot of energy. Right? If you were a grad student, you know that when you're thinking a lot, it actually feels exhausting.
Yeah.
And that's because your brain takes up massive amounts of sugar to activate. And so it's surprising that these signs of major activity actually lead to this dropping in the blood sugar.
Now, would that be because they're consuming the blood sugar?
It is not. So they tested that. It is not because of that.
Whoa.
It is not simply due to that occurring. They tested all sorts of things to show that this wasn't just a coinky-dink.
Sure.
And that it's actually causal.
So, wait, which one's causing which?
The neuron activity leads to greater uptake in the liver and muscles of sugar.
Whoa, so the rest of the body starts sucking up sugar.
Yeah.
Wow.
So we don't know. They're like, don't know why. But
conclusion?
Yeah, it was a good paper.
Yeah.
So now it's like, okay, but there's interesting applications to this, right? Because if we think about diabetes, at least type 1 diabetes, right, where individuals don't make enough insulin, if we can somehow trigger the brain.
So could we just give people Sudoku to solve?
Well, Sudoku puzzles aren't what trigger these.
Oh.
Yeah. It has to be like learning a new skill. It's not puzzles.
Not puzzle solving.
Right. But if we could somehow have some sort of electrode zap to reduce blood sugar levels.
That's fascinating.
I mean, who knows?
Who knows?
This could be used, or maybe nothing.
Or maybe something.
Or maybe something.
Or maybe something. It
Yeah.
could go somewhere.
But it's just like a weird, fun fact.
I love it. Oh, the body is amazing.
So many things to figure out. And I mean, this was shown in rats, so it remains to be seen if we do it too, but no reason to think why not.
Well, at least we're on the way to solving rat diabetes. That's important too.
Number one plague.
Yeah.
I mean, we have to protect the rats at all costs.
I'm not a big rat fan, personally. Unless it's the band, Rat. Then we can talk.
But there's 2 T's in that rat.
I know.
That makes all the difference.
Yeah. They learn a lot of skills.
Yeah, round and round they go. It's a rat single. Okay. That's it for our facts.
I love those facts.
Are you ready?
I'm very ready to meet our guest.
Yes, because this is the heart of Learn Real Good.
Yeah.
We have a special guest. We're going to bring them
Who
on
is
and
it this
talk
week,
to them.
Katie?
Oh, I'm so excited to introduce Alex Cross. They're a recent graduate of Western's combined master's PhD program in speech language pathology, in which her research focused on brain connectivity and reading ability in children. Alex is currently on maternity leave, gathering lots of anecdotal evidence on language development from her 11-month-old son, Remy, and will soon begin working as a preschool speech language pathologist at Grandview Kids. Alex enjoys coaching, synchronized swimming, camping, and baking tasty treats. Welcome to the show, Alex.
Welcome, Alex.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, it's so great to have you. Thanks for making time. I'm sure Remy keeps you busy.
Yeah, but he's in bed now, so.
Okay, we'll keep it down.
We'll skip the shouting part of the podcast.
Oh, wow. Speech language
Yeah.
pathology. Do you want to talk a bit about that discipline in general before we get to your research, Alex?
Yeah, sure. So speech language pathologists basically help people who have any issues with any aspect of communication. So that could include, I mean, the most common example that people think of is kids who are having trouble with speech sounds. So like kids who can't say their R's or things like that, or people who stutter. But there's a lot more that we do. We help kids who are sort of late talkers or having trouble with aspects of language. Some work with developing reading. Um, Also, lots of work with adults who have had strokes or other sorts of brain injuries that might be impacting their speech or language. And also, kind of interestingly, we also do work with people who have swallowing disorders. It's not really included under the name of our profession, but I think just because we're sort of experts in the anatomy and physiology of
Oh.
basically from like the shoulders up, like all the sort of anatomy and physiology that you need to produce voice and speech. And then swallowing kind of falls under that as well.
Oh,
Oh. That
neat.
is very cool. It's a part of the
Yeah.
body that's, I guess I don't think about a lot, but it's very important because I breathe and eat and speak through it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Lots going on in the mouth region.
Yeah, all the way down your neck.
Yeah, it's crazy how complicated it is.
Yeah.
So what's going on in our brains when we learn things like sounds? What's when a baby's like hearing their mom or dad or guardian make mouth sounds? What's going on with their brains?
Oh my gosh, so much. I mean, it kind of depends on like what stage of development they're in, because obviously like as you learn, you can sort of make connections to other information to like actually understand what the mom is saying. And so obviously there's some processing in terms of just like processing the sound and the frequency of that sound and yeah, like all the information about that sound, but then also kind of matching that to your existing knowledge to understand what they're saying, thinking about what they're saying. Then also if this baby is at an age where they can respond to what the mom is saying, then sort of initiating that response. It's yeah, a really complex process.
And we like I have friends who like I we live in Montreal, and we have friends who one parent speaks to their child in English and then the other parent speaks to them in French, and that brain must just be firing on all neurons.
Yeah, it's really amazing kids' ability to just pick up language really fast with not a lot of like explicit instruction. Obviously, we talk to babies a lot, but we don't really ever have to, sit down and teach them how to talk. They sort of pick it up.
Right.
And they're really amazing at learning multiple languages as well.
So why do you know why it is that like if you learn two languages when you're really young, it's a lot easier than when you're older. Do you have any thoughts on that?
So there's thought to be sort of like a sensitive period for language learning. And so that's kind of before you hit puberty in general. So before you hit puberty, it's a lot easier to pick up on the grammar of a language. So when you're older, you can often learn the vocabulary of language relatively well. I mean, obviously it takes a lot of effort, but you can pick up the vocabulary very well. But often people who learn languages later in life have a lot of trouble really learning the grammar of a language. And so that's why often you see people who are second language speakers of a language often making a lot of grammatical errors. And I don't really know why that is. I think that's something that we're still trying to figure out. But yeah, it's this sort of sensitive period. So it's really good to expose your kids to to languages early on
Yeah.
if you want them to learn them fluently.
Get them as many different syntaxes as possible.
Yeah.
What are some of the easier sounds to learn versus harder sounds when it comes to like I guess English?
Yeah, so easier ones are ones that, in general, the ones that tend to happen at the front of the mouth. So like m, b, p are easy sounds. They're often ones that we see babies pick up on pretty early because it's easy for them to see people around them making those sounds. because they involve using your lips to make them. Also, vowel sounds, obviously, those are the first sounds that babies usually make, just because there isn't any really like obstruction of airflow in vowels. It's your vocal tract is open, and so there's less sort of coordination of the articulators involved.
And so, Alex, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your research. Like, what was something that you were like fascinated about?
Yeah, so my research is on reading development in kids, so a little bit older than babies. My dissertation research specifically looked at school age kids, so around grades 4 to 7-ish, and how the connections in their brains support their reading ability.
Whoa. So yeah, let's talk about that. So how does brain connections relate to reading?
Yeah, so I mean, brain connections relate to pretty much everything we think about and we do. So, reading is a really complex process that involves a lot of different areas of the brain. The connections between those areas are really important for reading because, when we read, we want to read really fast and fluently and accurately. And so, in order to be able to do that, we need to have really coordinated processing across all of those brain areas. So in my research, I was using two particular methods, one where I was looking at the structure of those connections, and then one where I was looking at how areas of the brain are functionally connected. So kind of how areas of the brain are working together in coordinating that activity to support reading.
That's amazing. And I mean, I only know the hippocampus because Katie mentioned it earlier. And so what are the parts of the brain that get, light up when we're reading?
So when we talk about the function of the brain, so usually the back of the brain is the area of the brain most commonly associated with vision. So obviously that's the important initial step of reading. And then it moves sort of more forwards towards areas kind of around in the temporal lobes, like around the ears for more auditory processing, and then even spreading even more forwards. So if we're reading aloud, then we need more frontal areas of the brain to produce that language output, and also to sort of think about that information and that we're reading and understand it and make decisions based on it or connect it with our prior knowledge.
So when you're studying what's going on in our brains when we're reading, what are you actually doing? How do you study what's going on in a brain when someone's reading? Do you have some children in your office reading and you slice open their head? Obviously not, but how do you see what's going on there?
Yeah, so I use magnetic resonance imaging, or MRI. So most people have heard about this in like kind of a medical context. And so MRI is basically a big magnet that you lie in, and the magnetic field, basically tissues in the body react differently to the magnetic field, and so we can get an image from this with different contrast based on how those tissues are reacting to the magnetic field. And so I use two techniques, one called resting state functional MRI. So this technique, we're using functional MRI where we're looking at blood flow to the brain, and specifically how the brain is like taking up oxygen, like where oxygenated blood is flowing to the brain. And so that tells us which areas of the brain are really active. And so that's a methodology that's used, that you would probably hear about really commonly in the media when you hear about studies in the brain, where we're talking about brain activity. And so in my research, I'm using that information and looking at how areas of the brain are activated together across the course of a scan. So usually in a functional magnetic resonance imaging study, you would be looking at sort of localized brain activity in like one area. So for example, how, the visual cortex of the brain is active when you're reading. In my research, I'm looking at the whole brain and sort of how different areas of the brain are active together or not together throughout the course of the scan. And so this tells me about how those areas are working together.
Okay, so I've been in an MRI before.
Yeah?
And it was like
Did you get lost?
It's like a tube, right? There's not a lot of space between like your face and the thing.
Right.
How does one read in there?
So in my study, actually, it didn't actually involve any reading. So
whoa, you're studying reading without, and she doesn't even read.
Yeah. So I just administered a bunch of reading measures before they went in the MRI, and then in the MRI, I was just looking at their brain structure and sort of resting state function,
Oh.
and then correlating that with their reading skills.
Mm.
But we also do, like most research MRI facilities will have like a computer screen. And so what they have is at the very back of the MRI tube, there's a computer screen. And then right in front of the patient, there's sort of a mirror that reflects the computer
Hmm.
screen
Oh,
so they can see it
cool.
right in front of them. And you can
Smart.
also, there are like button boxes and things like that that you can have so that participants can respond by pressing a button, or like, or one of, you know, four buttons or something like that, so
Right.
that you can use that for your testing, or you can have them respond by saying something aloud. There's all sorts of ways you can creatively get responses from
Huh.
participants while you're conducting research.
It's very cool.
So
Yeah.
your research, so you're saying that if I read a book,
Mm-hmm.
if I did this, okay, here's a study I'm going to, I know you're done your PhD, Alex, but this
Mm-hmm.
is a study I'm going to propose to you.
Okay.
We do this I I read Harry Potter, but I didn't tell you I did this. Okay, it's a blind study. Okay, I come to you,
Mm-hmm.
Alex, and say, "Look at my brain." You stick me in the MRA tube, and then another time, I don't read Harry Potter. I just look at, you know, my reflection, like Narcissus, and then I come to you and I said, "Look at my brain." Would my brain look different if I just read versus I didn't?
I don't know about that. Probably not that different. Yeah, I don't think it would.
Hmm.
Oh, I mean,
Hmm.
it definitely could. It depends what areas of the brain you're looking at. I mean, the other thing I should probably mention is that in my studies, I'm looking at many like patterns across many participants. So, you know,
Hmm.
if you were to read something and come in, and then not read something and then come in, we would probably find differences in your brain, but they would probably be false positives, or, you
Right.
know, could be attributed to something else.
And so were you? Did you have like an idea of like I think I know what's gonna happen, and then you started doing all this research, and like did it match what you thought would happen, or did you find something else?
Sort of. So, a lot of studies of reading have focused on the left hemisphere of the brain. And that's
Hmm.
because for people who are right-handed, language processes tend to be lateralized to the left side of the brain in
Hmm.
like 98% of people who are right-handed. In people who are left-handed, it's like 50-50. So, a lot of studies of reading have focused specifically on people who are right-handed and looked only at the left hemisphere of the brain, and sort of ignored those right hemisphere areas because, you know, language is
Lefties
left
get left behind
lateralized.
again.
Yeah. But if language is left lateralized, then we only have to look at the left hemisphere areas. In my study, I looked at the entire brain, and so we found a lot of really interesting connections to the right hemisphere of the brain that were important in reading.
Neat.
And so that kind of suggested that it's a more coordinated process across the entire brain than just the left hemisphere. So yeah, that was probably one of the
That's
most
very cool.
unexpected things. Yeah.
Wow, do you think that sort of reflects general negligence? Like we assume that this half of the brain's for creative things, this half of the brain's for logical things, and we take that so literally that we turn a blind eye to the other half. Do you think this discovery that both parts matter might be sort of underlying other processes as well?
Kind of. I think that as scientists, we, you know, do a lot of things like that to help
Mm-hmm.
improve our statistical
Hmm.
inferences, to make sure that we're like controlling for false positives and making sure we have lots of statistical power, so that we can, you know, do the best possible study. But then I think we kind of do that, and in some ways we lose how well we can actually generalize
Mm.
our study findings
Right.
to like the general population. So, you know, because a lot of studies exclude people who are left-handed, then we have all these studies that the results only apply to people who are right-handed, and
Right.
then, you know, we don't know very much about language and reading in people who are left-handed. So it's, yeah, it's kind of a bit of a trade-off.
That's
It's
so
it's
frustrating.
so fascinating how I mean in the quest for simplicity. I mean, given that science doesn't always have infinite resources, like the looking to simplify your experiment to like simply simplify, as you say, your statistics, um, it does impact the conclusions you can draw and how general you can make them. Because if you like, there's an old joke in physics where,
Oh, I
someone
cannot wait
these
for
are
this.
great classic physics jokes are always hilarious. But like if you have to like say calculate the surface area of a cow, right? Like as a as an example. You don't actually have to do this usually. But then you just approximate it as a sphere to make your math simpler. And it's like, okay, well, we have the area, the surface area of the cow, but you used a sphere to do it. So it's like, how accurate and how good are your results really going to be if you're not able to actually, get into the nitty gritty of the details? And I think that's something that maybe people don't understand, especially historically when we've done medical research. It's usually on men,
White men.
and so then the results of it don't get passed on. We've been watching Love on the Spectrum,
Yes, that came to my mind, too.
and then how a lot of autism diagnoses are all predicated on things that present in men, and so girls often get diagnosed much later than boys in autism, and so on and so on. Like so many simplifications are done that it really does impact how we apply them in the real world.
Because there's also this assumption that, specifically with that example, a white man is like the simple version of a human, and that
Right.
it will apply to everyone with, some pesky hormones to deal with, right? But it's not as simple as that.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's one of the things that, as a non-scientist, you're not really sure. Like, it feels like science is a bit of a black box, and the media presents like new findings say this, and then it's oversimplified. Whereas, if you read the paper, there's so many caveats and sample size restrictions that it becomes tricky for the layperson who maybe doesn't follow science or have that science training to be able to discern. And that's part of what this conversation's about.
Now, Alex, I understand you did some work with dyslexia as well.
Yeah, so some of my dissertation research was on kids with sort of a wide range of reading abilities. And then another part of my research focused on kids specifically who struggle with reading. So these were kids who were participating in a reading intervention program through their schools. And so they came in to participate in my study at the beginning of their reading intervention to do an MRI then, and then also at the end of the intervention to do an MRI again. So this way I could look at how their brains had changed over the course of the reading intervention and how that sort of related to, how much improvement we actually saw in their reading skills over the course of the intervention.
So during the intervention, what were you working on to sort of help them improve their reading? Like, what was sort of the strategy there? I'm sure it wasn't just keep reading, right? What were the specific keep reading kid?
So I should acknowledge that I wasn't actually the one doing the intervention.
Okay.
This was done through their schools. So there's this program called Empower Reading that was developed by researchers at Sick Kids that's used in a number of school boards across Ontario and I think also Canada. But in London, Ontario, this is quite widely used in the school board. And so kids who are struggling with reading will be identified to participate in this program starting in grade 4. And so it's done in small groups, and there's a teacher who's trained through the Empower Reading methodologies. And so basically they learn a number of strategies for identifying words. So that includes, identifying sounds, but also identifying word parts. So like prefixes and suffixes that occur commonly in the English language, and also sort of identifying patterns in how sounds change based on what other letters they're surrounded by. And so it's sort of this really explicit way of teaching sort of the sounds of the English language. And then they also learn a number of really interesting metacognitive strategies. So metacognition is sort of how you think about how you're thinking. And so they're thinking about how they're using the strategies and whether or not they were successful, and then how they're going to use those strategies to, attack another word.
And so that field of study would be metacognition? Thinking about the thinking of thinking?
Yeah, that's what we're doing right now.
Wow. So what's going on in someone's brain who has dyslexia? What's different about what's going on in their brain than someone who doesn't when it comes to reading?
The tricky thing with dyslexia is that we don't really know what one thing it is. Like, we can't put somebody who is struggling with reading in an MRI scanner and find the thing that's wrong with their brain. Studies of reading disability are looking generally at like a group of children or adults who struggle with reading, and looking at the patterns that sort of come out. So we can't really identify reading disability based on the basis of one scan. So we don't really know. It seems like they're sort of relying on sort of different connections from those that children who are reading typically would. And often sort of connections to areas of the brain that are sort of less commonly used in reading. So one nice way to think about it is, kids who are really strong readers are using sort of the big highways through the brain, and the kids who are struggling with reading are sort of taking smaller
Oh,
country roads, and
interesting.
so they're getting lost, or maybe they're getting there, but
Hmm.
it just takes them a lot longer to get there.
And so, did you spot anything in the MRI before and after?
When I looked at the patterns that we saw from before to after, we actually saw some compensatory changes. So it wasn't that these kids' brains were sort of normalizing to show patterns that typical readers show. They were sort of showing patterns of compensation and especially engaging more frontal areas of the brain, which I think might be kind of linked to those metacognitive strategies that they were learning, because the frontal area of the brain is the area that we really use for like sort of those higher order thinking processes. And so it could be just that they're really consciously engaging those processes when they're reading. And so the connections to those areas of the brain become a lot more important in sort of their brain's reading network.
And I was thinking during this conversation with audiobooks, would audiobooks affect your brain differently than normal or
Visual
typical
reading?
visual reading?
Yeah,
However you
absolutely.
describe it?
It's audiobooks is listening to an audiobook is more of the like, it's just sort of you're listening to language. It's almost like you guys are listening to me talk right now, and so that's sort of the same process that's happening when you're listening to an audiobook. It sort of removes that whole visual component.
So, is it when we read, are we converting visual input into auditory input?
Yeah, so you're sort of matching your knowledge of letter shapes onto your knowledge of the sounds, and
Whoa.
then matching that also onto your semantic knowledge of like whatever you're reading. So for example, if you see the word cat, you see the letter CAT, and so you're matching that onto the sounds k at t, and then matching that onto your whole semantic knowledge of, what a cat is, what a cat looks like, what a cat sounds like or feels like, all of those things.
That's
Whoa.
fascinating.
So someone who's deaf, I guess, doesn't do that middle step? If they've always been, if they don't know, if they can't perceive sound?
Yeah, I don't know all that much about we call it phonological awareness. So it's sort of like your awareness of an ability to sort of process and manipulate sounds in language. I don't know all that much about phonological awareness in people who are deaf or hearing impaired, but I do know that in sign language they still sort of have like sounds, even though they're not
Right.
auditory sounds. They have sort of the same
Interesting.
kind of unit of speech in sign language as we do in spoken language. So yeah, I'm not totally sure.
That's amazing.
Okay,
The
that's
brain
so
is very
neat.
elastic.
Yeah, it is.
It's fascinating.
Don't bounce it
Yeah.
around though.
It's too late.
No,
Boing,
don't. I
boing,
wouldn't,
boing,
I
boing.
wouldn't recommend that. So, how did you get into this, Alex? How did when along your life did you say, speech stuff?
Yeah, I took kind of a roundabout route to get there. I did my undergraduate degree in psychology. I started off just in general science, but really liked my first year psychology course, and so then ended up in psychology. And then I really enjoyed my sort of psychology language development, and it was, I think, cognitive and language development. It was just really interesting to me to like learn how kids think, and it's I find it really interesting to think about how like this really complex process of language is acquired by kids so seemingly easily. So then I went on and did a master's in psychology at Western. And then when I got to the end of that program, I wasn't really sure what I was going to do. I kind of wanted to do something a little more applied. So I was thinking the speech language pathology program, which is normally just a master's, but Western does have a combined PhD master's program. And I kind of liked the idea of an opportunity to, sort of contribute to evidence-based practice in speech language pathology, and yeah, take kind of a more applied approach to my research. And my master's supervisor was also really interested in finding somebody to work on sort of this project that he has had funding for, which was research on the brain and reading ability, and specifically kids with reading disability in this reading program. So yeah, it all kind of came together, and I ended up in this program.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And I guess were you always, I mean, this is a question we always like to ask our guests, is like, were you always like a curious kid? Did you feel like you wanted to go into the sciences early on, or is that something that developed later on?
I think I always liked science, especially sort of like life sciences. Yeah, more sort of the life, medical science, psychology side of things than like, like sort of hard physics, chemistry, that kind of thing. I definitely don't think I knew what a speech language pathologist was when I was
Right,
a kid.
yeah.
I think a lot of people get into the career because they or a close friend or family member saw a speech language pathologist and their life was really impacted by a speech language
Hmm.
pathologist. And so that's how they know about the career. But that definitely wasn't the case for me. It was sort of something I realized was an option when I was in my undergrad.
And I think this is another theme that's come up through our podcast, which is like people don't know what careers are available to you in
Yeah.
different fields. And it's like, you think of science when you're in high school, like person with a lab coat, person, running tables,
Doctor.
the doctor, a medical doctor, and dentist, and all of these. But there's so many different careers in science that
Mm-hmm.
unless you're like personally exposed to
Yeah.
it, like you might not ever be aware of it.
I think the thing that blows my mind too is even like once you're in a specific field, the variety of things you can do. Like in
Sure.
speech language pathology, the variety and the types of patients we see is huge, and the you see all ages, and yeah, it's just yeah, it's there's so much stuff you can do.
I mean, and even in the research that you're doing, there's like the person who maintains the MRI machine. There's the
Mm-hmm.
people that have to teach the kids how to handle their dyslexia. There's like all of these different
Yeah.
subsets and
Mm-hmm.
subfields that go into all of these specialties. It's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So now you're done. You nailed it,
Nice work.
Dr. Cross. You
Thank you.
finished your PhD. So now you're going to work as a speech language pathologist at Grandview Kids. Do you want to tell us what's Grandview Kids? What is that institute?
So it's a children's treatment center for the Durham region in Ontario, so sort of Pickering, Ajax, Whitby, Oshawa area. In terms of speech language pathology, the big program that they run is the preschool speech and language program. So they see preschool age kids, anybody 4 or under who is has any kind of concerns about communication. So that
Mm.
could be, kids who are late talkers, kids who have any kind of hearing impairment, kids who are having trouble with articulation of certain speech sounds, stuttering, all sorts of things. So yeah, that's the big one. And then often those kids sort of get taken on by school speech language pathologists once
Hmm.
they start school.
And so I gotta ask, you have your own little one at home now.
Mm-hmm.
What has that been like? Like you studied all these things and you worked
Yeah.
with kids, but now you're seeing one every day.
Like acquiring all those skills
Yeah.
in
Yeah,
real
it's been
time.
it's been really cool. I think the thing that surprised me the most, I don't know, I'm kind of surprised that I didn't realize this, but I feel like you maybe can't have any kind of real concept of this until you are a parent, is how quickly they develop skills.
Oh
And
yeah.
Wow.
then sort of suddenly also stop doing them and then develop them again. It's very strange. But yeah, like, he's been cooing and making lots of sounds like that for a long time, and then suddenly started babbling and said like ah
Mhm.
wah wah, and then he did that once, and then the next day that was like the only sound he made the entire day, over and over and over again. And
Ah,
so
wow, wow, wow.
yeah. And so, I kind of didn't realize until now how fast it happens. And
Huh.
then also, he stops making that sound and then starts making it again a few days later. So, yeah, it's sort of all over the place. It kind of helped me appreciate how much of a roller coaster of development it is.
That's
It's
so
so it's
cool.
so cool, and there's so many like to get to language. There's so many parts that have to go. At first, it's like, you have to make sound, like control your
Mm-hmm.
voice to be able to make sounds. Then realize that it's you that's making those sounds, and then
Mm-hmm.
controlling the shapes of those sounds, and then being like, oh, I recognize these sounds, and they have and like that moment where you realize that they have meaning, and then
Mm-hmm.
associating sounds to meaning is a whole other thing.
Yeah, it,
That's
it makes you kind of realize how complex language is.
yeah.
It you brought up autism on the spectrum before, and that show really kind of reminds me how complex like our social structure is and
Yes.
our social conventions. And I kind of think watching a baby is like that. You kind of realize
Mm.
how complex language is, like how many different components there are for them to learn and understand, for them to be like competent communicators.
Yeah.
That reminds me of this story of my nephew when he was really little. He was, I think, a year and a half. It was a magical time because he was just like a sponge. He was very bright, and I would just say a word that would be new to him, and he'd be like, "Oh, this word," and he'd repeat it. I'm like, he was just learning everything, and so I was just trying to teach him everything around us.
Mm-hmm.
And he picked up a tool, like a child, like a toy tool, and it was a monkey wrench. He's like, "Wrench." I'm like, "Oh well." It's actually a monkey wrench, to be specific. And he was like, "Ooh, monkey wrench." And then he pointed to a picture of a monkey. He's like, "Monkey wrench." I'm like, "No, no, no." And so I ruined him. I thought I helped him, but I broke him.
Now he only says monkey wrench.
No, that's all he says. Monkey wrench, monkey wrench, monkey wrench.
It's like being John Malkovich.
Yes. Oh, wow. Well, Alex, this has been tremendous.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much
Thanks
for
so
being
much.
here, and good luck with your little one, and good luck with your
Thank
new
you.
career. Grandview
Yeah,
Kids
thanks.
is lucky to have you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
That was Alex Cross, speech language pathologist.
That's amazing. Like, yeah, I guess someone has to study and figure out how language works.
It's so neat.
It's so complicated.
Yeah, once you really don't get an appreciation for it as an adult, I think most of the time, until you try to teach someone to read or teach someone how to
Right.
say things, and you realize, at
There's
least
so
for
much
English,
going
like
on.
the rules are real loosey goosey.
Yeah, so much
and
context clues
Yes.
and yeah, for something that you kind of take for granted is just
Absolutely.
the idea that I'm going to speak. I have a thought.
Yep.
I'm going to formulate it. It's going to come out as sound. You're going to understand it, and then
Yeah.
you're going to respond to it. And just it seems like it shouldn't be possible.
Yeah, not even, and we've been focused on the brain, like
Yeah.
the vocal cords too.
Yeah.
Like, how do we make such precise sounds? I know it has to do with our teeth and our tongue and the shape of our mouth and
Yeah.
and the air being pushed. There's so many variables.
And it's right next to the swallowing hole.
Don't get me started on that.
It's a weird design.
So much for it's definitely not
It's a weird
intelligent design.
design,
Put
yeah.
both your holes there.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
I mean, you want to make use of what's there, but I feel like that's a really critical function.
Yeah, well, you choke and die.
Yeah, you go like, I gotta eat and I gotta breathe. Let's use the same tube.
Same tube at the same time. That's right. Wow.
Wow.
That was very cool.
Very, very cool. Thanks, Dr. Cross, for being with us.
Absolutely. Well, Vinny, I think we're wrapping up.
Yeah,
We learned a lot today.
I learned it real good.
Yeah, we learned about radio waves, mysterious
Yeah.
radio waves.
Yeah, we learned about the thing that you said.
That brain.
Oh yeah, brain
waves
and sugar,
are
blood sugar
related to
levels.
blood sugar levels.
Yeah. I have a very short-term memory.
Well, if we get those sharp brain
Ripples.
ripple ice cream, we can commit those short-term memories to long-term memories.
Yeah.
Well, that's it for us this week, folks. Hope you enjoyed Learn Real Good. Send them out on our socials.
If you want to find us on social media, you can follow us at LRG Pod on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. That's LRG Pod for the Learn Real Good podcast. Stay up to date with all of our releases, news, and information.
What about grad students who want to be a guest?
If you want to be a guest on Learn Real Good, just send us an email at learnrealgoodpodcast@gmail.com. Learnrealgoodpodcast@gmail.com. Your source for information, fun, and good times.
Whoa, you're promising a lot.
Yeah, I have a good time.
Me too. Till next time, folks. Thanks for listening.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.